All right, recording has commenced. That's a good way for folks to catch up asynchronously on all the wacky fun that they missed. And this class is going to be good. We're going to go back through a little bit of what we covered with the reverse wireframing process to arrive at the feature function list. And then we are going to dive into the next part of the process, which is kind of doing something similar for the kind of the goal or task flow analysis. So we do a very kind of loose, high level breakdown of that. I'll go through the process there, and then we can bookend that with a couple of insights on the overall business model of the page in looking at what people are doing and with that task, there's primary, secondary, and tertiary task flows. What are people doing there? And based on what people are doing, what is the likely revenue model, right? So we're breaking down a little bit of how, first we looked at all the parts and what order they're in, and now we're seeing like how it functions basically as a machine, right? And I think we could probably jump in. Now I feel the waiting room. I want to make sure nobody's stuck in the waiting room.
Yeah, I got straight in this time.
Okay, there's no waiting room, so we were able to turn it off?
I got straight in this time.
Excellent. Okay, cool. Okay, good. Then I will trust that it's working. And because I think I left some people waiting out there for about 10 minutes last time.
That was me, Eric.
I'm sorry. I'm a fool.
Still came back.
I'm a fool. Thank you.
I needed more.
All right. Well, this is good stuff. Let's jump into the class. I'm going to do a screen share. Let me share the correct screen. And share. All right, here we are. Pilot class. I shared this out on the classroom, but I will share this link again here. I see some of you are there, but I will share this in the chat. All right. And that should be, anybody with the link should be able to get to that. And that's taking us here to our second UX pattern research pilot class. Yay! Fun and casual introduction. You're now familiar as we jumped into.
We'll recognize this. Oh, I'm sorry, that's me. Sorry, guys.
Oh, absolutely okay. So everybody's familiar now with the reverse wireframe example from last class, either by being in the class or by watching the video and working through some of the material. And a few of you pinged me with some questions. Got some great work. And so there's two things. I want to go through some of that work and have folks discuss that. And then also, I want to jump into a deck that has some examples of what I've done with it, and then where we take it into the kind of the next phase of taking it past the reverse wireframes. What I've done is I've taken the example from the previous class and I've taken it to the next step of going through the not just listing the tasks and goals, but kind of mapping them visually based on the reverse wireframes, and then putting those into ordered lists of goals and steps to those goals, and then putting those in a task kind of a flow chart where it's really easy to look at the breakdown of the task flow model in a really sort of a conventional way. And then we'll take a look at the revenue model and the conversion model as discussed, but that'll be more of a presentation. So that's a little bit of an overview. First, we're going to go into reviewing the work and making sure everybody's got a great foundation and is in a good place with the previous process here, the reverse wireframes and the feature function priority list. And then we'll jump into taking that to the next level and jump into the homework assignment. Should you rise to the challenge? All right. So I think, a few things that were fun here. Let's see. All right. This looks like it is travel sites, yes? And this is Karina's. And so I'm happy to go through these. Basically, in looking at them all, everybody got the basic concept. And there was one thing that a bit of common feedback I'll get into. But the great news is that everybody was able to really easily grasp this, digest it, and get the basic process down, not only where they could understand it, but where a stakeholder could come to this and really get it without too much context, right? So not only is it transferable, but it's a transferable skill that then is shareable, immediately accessible to other stakeholders. And so bringing it down into these blocks again is very useful, because then you can look at sort of the large patterns of how things are arrayed, and the visual space and order that they have on the page. Then that's broken down and distilled further into global navigation, the logos, the flights. And then one interesting thing starts to happen, and that's the kind of the challenge in the homework assignment, is to do a little bit of cross analysis of all three of these final lists, right? So look at the list and, hey, are there 2 or 3 things that jump out at you? Just insights like when you look at all 3 together on a page, because that's where it really starts getting interesting. What I do notice is that there can be a bit of a deviation in the syntax of the taxonomy. That's 2 unnecessarily expensive words, but just that here global nav, apples to apples, right? Utility nav, good. But then the main image, here it's image, it's not necessarily main image. And we'll notice this trend in different ways on some of the other examples. And it really should be apples to apples. Each item here should have a exactly corresponding name, because people who don't create them can't make that leap. And so if people want to kind of reverse track or associate at this stage, it's really important to keep that consistent. And it's a different cognitive step. So of course it's natural to process from the one to the other. But it's really important, just at least with that first naming string, that they're identical. And that'll serve everybody really well in the long run. It can be a drag in the short run, because it should be a fast exercise. But let's look at a few more here, if everybody's okay with that. Is it helpful looking at the student work? I mean, at everybody's work, at colleagues' works? Because my work looks like student work too, because I'm always, learning about it. So here we have a healthcare site, and we have something that's even simpler, right? It's just an outline, and that works great. They don't have to be gray box. They can just be outlines like this, where it's a very linear kind of layout. Is that? Oh, I like the presentation. If you want to do the video, I'd love to have the video within the video, but it's entirely up to you. I should probably share the deck. I will. All right. So, and here again, primary banner, the logo, navigation menu. There's a lot of correlation. And even here with the idea of quick link 1, 2, 3, just to make sure that all those are really consistent and do correlate, apples to apples. The call to action here, call to action button, just as long as they're really, there's no ambiguity between the visual element and then that listed element. Looking at another healthcare site, really interesting here, the awareness banner, the primary picture with text, the CTA. And so with these, right, there's actually a remarkable amount of similarity in these high level medical websites, right? They're all having, some type of call to action above the fold. They're all having this, essentially this consistent pattern. So if you wanted to say, hey, should we make our site, correspond to the current mental model? Not only would the answer be yes, but you'd have a map of that, right? And the thing to do then is say, okay, now in our position relative to other competition or other folks, comparable, entities, where are we at? As far as how we're wanting to differentiate ourselves, because then what you can do is you can take this baseline and you can then very strategically and with a fair degree of confidence begin to ideate on where and how to make that differentiation consistent within the website, right? So if it's you always talk to a human, then our medical experiences, we're very, very high touch, human first, right? And so maybe the call to action there is like, speak with a human, right? So you know where the action is, but then you can add your differentiator, your unique brand qualifier in that way, if that makes sense, right? So you know where the baseline is for the mental model. I don't think it was the most elegant example of like talk to a human, which is why ideating is a little tricky. But the basic idea of knowing where the baseline is, knowing what folks are doing and saying, you know, they're either saying, you know, call to schedule an appointment, you know, learn more, you know, get it on your schedule, right? That type of thing. So it all seems to be appointment-based actions. And the differentiator here could be, you know, speak live with one of our people to make sure, you know, that you know, everything's right for you, or however you could apply that. So I guess two levels. One, it gives the baseline, and then having that baseline, it gives you areas where you could kind of riff off of that and ideate. Does that make sense? Cool.
Yeah.
And you know, again, here getting these and here the initial thoughts is really great, because in looking at this kind of, you know, layout, all of a sudden insights become apparent, right? Doesn't quite have a good flow to the navigational, seems blocky, you know, and then the quick link menu and also the hamburger, that immediately shows that there's multiple navigational taxonomies that are a little bit in conflict, right? So this can be a great place to start taking notes. Yes, Randy.
So like, I was a little unclear. On the diagram, it's like, it'll say quick link. Do you like when there's like the colon and then like it actually shows the menu item, or how do you normally do it? Like, for example, in the diagram, if you write everything out, it's just going to get cluttered. And then in the feature list, do you like that you like actually say what like the menu name item was, or do you keep it just like quick link, you know, quick link 2, 3? Do you know what I mean? Do you like to spell out doctors, location, services? Is that normally how you do it?
So you could do it, Apple, you know, just the name on the, you know, reverse wireframe is the name on the list. And that's the absolute minimal way to do that. And that works great. But there's always usually a bit more, because those gray boxes can generally be, you know, content areas or blocks. And so it does require more, you know, enumeration of the elements in there.
Yeah, I felt like I was being a little too vague in mine, but I wasn't sure how, you know, how abstract, you know, sort of you wanted it to be, or
okay.
Yeah, I like the way they did it there, where they oh, seriously,
I can't get, we're playing the video, hold on,
play the video.
Has anyone seen this? Has anyone taken the time?
Randy makes videos, so
this is genius.
About reverse wireframing.
nobody can hear it. It's super quiet.
Oh, in short,
If you pause it, I could just narrate it live.
by all the shiny things on competitors' websites when you're looking for comparisons. So I'm new at this, and there may be some corrections I make after I review this with the class, but here is my current understanding. All right, so I first heard about this topic at the Concentric conference this year. Has to do
Enough about me.
Websites. I chose to do 3 different websites that were competitors of each other, right? You've got your Apple, Microsoft, and Samsung. I could have gone and done different industries and found other things, but I decided it would be interesting to see how they lined up with each other. All right, so the Apple website here. You know, I'll go into talking a little bit more about some of the observations as I go through the presentation, but you can see how this is a screenshot of the first portion of the website that you see before you scroll down. Really, instead of just trying to do the whole website, we're just simply saying, okay, I loaded the website, here's what I see, and let's analyze that. All right, so looking at this, you know, not a big surprise, primary navigation at the top. There's a value proposition about shopping on their website. Their top product is featured, and then they go into featuring some of their other product lines, right? So on this side, I overlaid the actual website's picture with these more general categories describing the different segments of the website. I also added a little bit of transparency just so that as I was looking at it, you know, I could sort of see, oh, you know, not be too distracted by the graphics, but I thought that was a good way to remind myself of what I was talking about as the underlying feature. On the right side here, a little bit more detail, but still not too much, just saying, okay, yeah, they list their different product categories. They've got a shopping cart. And then they go through a variety of different products. All right. Microsoft looks quite a bit different than Apple, right? I'm not going to talk through every little feature here. But again, when you look at this website, it's an interesting difference because they're not like Apple would just have one product on this whole line, and you'd scroll down the website. It's kind of like Apple has more of a spacious feel to it. They're saying, hey, here's our fine merchandise, the best of each category. And Microsoft comes across a little bit more like, hey, we've got all these different divisions. Each division needs to be represented, you know, and things like that. All right, so of course we've got our Samsung here. Before I go to the next slide, the thing that was interesting, the way Samsung did it, was that they not only had a secondary filter here, but they chose to do sort of a filtering approach. On Microsoft, clicking on one of these things here would take you to an entirely different page within the site. But here on Samsung, if you click smartphones and wearables, basically it acts as a filter, and then just this bottom part here, refreshes. All right, so Samsung and Microsoft feeling like they have a lot of similarities, and Apple feeling like it's a simpler design. Now, I have a hard time when I'm not seeing all these different things at once, sort of comparing them. So I thought another interesting way to look at this is to sort of put all the reverse wireframes on the same page, because by the time I go to the next slide, I've already been like, what did the last one look like? So when looking at these things, I thought it might be sometimes helpful to, of course, you can print them all out, lay out the papers and things like that. But here at PowerPoint, here's a way to look at all those things at once and sort of give you an idea on how the layout of those websites differs. And again, with listing out the different features, it's really hard to memorize, which one is like which. And so I thought it was, again, interesting to sort of couple all these up so that you can see them all at once, and have any kind of differences become more obvious. All right, that's all. I may have some tweaks after we have our next class, but that is my comparisons.
Okay, that was great, super great as far as being able to go through that, make the student work and process accessible to others. So gratitude there. And also in looking at, breaking out and doing the cross comparison of the 3 reverse wireframes, and then moving that to the cross comparison of the feature function list, right? Which is great process. The one thing I'd like to encourage a little bit is don't be afraid of containment of those key visuals, because you're really wanting to visually here, let's say, the primary visual, yes, the focal point of it is there, but really the key visual here is atmospheric. And so you might make the containment of that scale, because what we're trying to do is represent not just the hieratic placement, but also the layering. That can be
the divisions of the website. Yeah. Okay. Yep. The containers. Yeah. Okay.
Right. And so even here, with the call to action, but don't be afraid, how do we say, it's okay to be literal about it. And if we're abstracting it, I like the idea where you're abstracting it where the visual weight is, because that's an interesting way to convey more, more about the imagery. But for the general purposes, the idea, is to get the element mapped out.
Yeah, the container sounds like what you're going for.
Yeah, the development container in that respect, absolutely. So very cool. And once again, you're gonna have to tell me how to get that cool trick where you're talking in the corner of the video. That's super pro. Like that's so awesome. All right.
Yeah, and one thing I'll go back and do, like here, I just said category 1, 2, 3. Like I'll probably go back and I'll probably like to the right of that. I like the other way, the other one sort of then spelled out in detail what that was,
Absolutely. I think that's good. And one thing that it showed, about consumer electronics, they all have, product families. And that's just fairly irreducible about them, right? So if if you're going to a major computer manufacturer, that is by far the baseline, right? So just interesting insights that are really well grounded, because in a way they're so obvious, but it's also gathering them and documenting them in context is where a lot of the power of this comes through. So cool. And I think I'm trying to move along a little bit quickly here because I don't know if we only have 40 minutes. I think I have to upgrade my version of Zoom for the recording time. So I wanted to jump into the kind of the next step here, if that's okay with everybody. Everybody feels pretty good about the work and their ability to kind of do the first step, right? I think everybody did really great. There's some feedback on ways to even take it to the next level. And then what I want to show is how that process kind of dovetails into the next one. So you'll recall I pulled this from the deck. This was one of the recommended sites. I did promise to do 3 of these, but what I did is I did one in depth as far as the whole next process. And I just didn't have the bandwidth to do 3 of these, and I don't think it's advantageous to present 3 different ones of these. Particularly what I did is I kind of like here again, that containment, that overlapping, key visuals over here a little bit because the action's here, but a lot of the imagery, the lines that draw your eye over to that are here. There's a lot of masses here, and so that's that overlapping that I was talking about. But then what gets interesting is we went from this stage to this stage. And then the next stage is this task mapping. And what it is basically is when you look at the site, how do you as a, both a reasonable user and as somebody with your experience and expertise in the overall digital product design, what is the obvious primary task, right? Like to me, in looking at this, this is the obvious primary task, right? And so how do we map that? So if we say our primary user pathway here is in green, people generally come in and there's a lot of data on either the F or the Z scanning pattern in Western English reading and speaking cultures that scan from top left down to bottom right when they read. So the F or the Z pattern, or actually what can almost be like if you combined an F and a Z, so that people kind of zig back. So they'll scan here and then they'll zig back in a Z and then they'll come back and read it this direction, right? Overall, what happens is people come in here, they scan, okay, boom, 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 bam, or they come in here and they scan, no, Cherokee's not my jam, I'm whatever this is, right? So then they click to their model. That seems to be the secondary flow, is if they don't convert them here, the same value proposition is echoed very clearly, just visually, almost without a menu hierarchy. That would be the second one. And then a third one, which I'm throwing in, which is a little bit from experience, but I don't have any data on, is let's say somebody's coming in and they just want to find the dealership because they want to go to the dealer, right? So boom, those are assumptive, and so that's one of the drawbacks of this. Fortunately, the tertiary task model is not as critical as the primary, and the primary is almost always obvious. Primary and secondary are pretty well grounded. To me, as a researcher, it's a bit speculative that the find a dealer would be there, but if you look at these categories, these are more differentiating categories similar to the type. So let's say if you're into the identity of it, if you want stories of other people who have Jeeps, like these are like, how do you get converted, right? Oh, shopping tools, I want, right? But then really the main actions are, these are larger sort of functional, functional pathways. And of the 3, find a dealer it's really common that people just want to get off the website and get down to the place. So that's why I'm thinking that, but that is assumptive, and that is a drawback of these. again, if you can, with this type of analysis, have, any other data metrics on it, or you can get eye tracking, that's great. Any other things that you can use to lean into it. But really, it's the basic idea of getting a snapshot and getting a pretty high probability of, like, again, it doesn't matter on the feature function list if they're exactly in this order, like if one or two are off, because the overall pattern's pretty resilient. And I'd say in a similar manner, the main things that folks want to accomplish, are as long as you use your common sense, it works out pretty well. So in taking these then through, through this list, what I did is just kind of copied and pasted, okay, primary user pathway is green. They go through nav, they go through key visual, value proposition copy, and they go right to that call to action. I'm going to buy a Cherokee. Boom. Secondary user pathway, they come in, they scan it, but nope, that's not my jam. I like the deal. And then let's say they, go on through these and they click here, right? So again, it's going through the same pathway here, except after value prop, they skip the CTA, go to alternate model 1, 2, and they stop on 3, or tertiary user pathway, again, speculative, but in the navigation, they just want to find the dealership and get in the car. Translate.
Eric,
Yes.
quick question on that. So are we doing it based on our experience, or what we think we would do if we were to do it? Or are we making assumptions on someone else? Does that make sense?
Yes, what we're making an assumption about is the business intent of the designers, or just, let's say, the intent of the designers.
Okay.
Because it may not be a business situation, but what do the designers intend for me to do here, right? And then based on, there are things, there's a heuristic evaluation, there's a cognitive walkthrough, right? These are processes where they have expert evaluators go through. So people who are familiar with websites, who do that for a living, who study and compare them, right? And there's various levels of expertise, but really anybody who's going in and in that, looking at it from that facet is going to have the advantage of looking at it from that angle, right? And so the cognitive walkthroughs, the way they reduce sort of variability and bias in those is they'll have 3, 4, 5 people do a similar cognitive walkthrough. Ideally, right? In reality, places are lucky to get one person going through. And so, it again is open to idiosyncratic bias, and it's good to have at least a minimum of 3 different folks who would do this, evaluate that. But even getting in, it's really remarkable if nobody looks at it versus if one person looks at it, it still gets you more than halfway there at the end of the day, if that makes sense. Randy, did you have your hand up on a question?
Yeah, I do have a question. It looks like they just upgraded your time too, Eric. I got a notification. So
what, I got a bonus?
It's you got a bump there. It looks like they upgraded you for this meeting. Yeah, celebration over. All right, carrying it. So on the top of the Jeep website, I was curious. On the top right hand side, they had build a Jeep or whatever. It was a build and price. Now, did you figure that was less obvious than finding a dealer, so it wasn't worth mentioning, or you know what I mean? Like, where do you draw the line?
Yeah, I mean, my math on that, and there's a little bit of a gestalt to it, right? Or the 5-second test, where I'll go through and I'll be like, find a dealer, right? And again, some of that can be, biased. I mean, my math on it is build and price. That's a really advanced specific thing that not a lot of people, generally encounter. And if they already haven't clicked on the sales funnel just for one of these, things that they like that's dedicated to, probably a very high converting group.
Yeah, it's like they already talked to the salesperson, and the salesperson said, you can go to build and price your own on the website, and then they
Right. And so my experience with those is that, that level, there's fundamentals and then there's activation and innovation, right? And so fundamentals are like 70%, activation, like coupon, you just want to make sure like people can go online and buy it and it works, right? So that's the fundamentals. And then, getting up to the innovation like that, where it's like, I'm going to build my own shoe online or whatever, I'm building this car, or it's aspirational, right? I'm going to build this custom car and then I'm going to to save up for it for a year. I think all of those are pathways, but to me, the amount of cognitive multi-stage investment involved in that one at first blush was way less than like, I just want to go down and be sold a car, right? Especially in older audiences. A lot of times they just want to find the dealer. Again, very speculative, and that's going to be my analysis of it. Because also, there's a really, the bias of me not selecting, Spanish, right? That a lot of people are going to want that functionality. To me, that functionality is a bit of a qualifier that would then enable people to access the primary functionality as well. So that's why of the three I chose Find a Dealer, and why I kind of scanned past the navigation is I just took an overall, like I sussed up all those words on there, and I was like,
You're not going for every single pathway. You're kind of going for the top three that were intended if somebody like was to visit the site for the first.
Right. And if the company, right, because the company that, it's very high converting for them to get people down to the actual dealership. Probably, I mean, orders of magnitude more so than just coming to the website, right? The number of people who come into the dealership and convert is probably, 10 or 100 times better than just anybody who stumbles into their website. Again, speculative, but when people are down there and they do that, their kind of traditional sales model, that's been very successful for car dealerships, prior even to online sales.
The touch and feel, the tangibility of it is often what converts people.
Yeah, right. And driving it and the feel of like, and you'll find that actually for high ticket items, the conversion, it'll be longer. They'll get you in content longer before giving you another upsell. They try to saturate on high ticket items, whereas they give a lot of small triggers for lower ticket items as a general pattern in e-commerce. So I think some of it is looking at a lot of these. If you feel like, there's not quite the experience, or you haven't looked at like a million website, right? Like, then just get a couple of colleagues to look at it, and you'll gain confidence, because actually the insights will be remarkably similar. Things actually add up and overlap and line up more often than they don't in the world. Like, car accidents are horrible, and more people I know have been harmed by cars than probably any, other single thing. But any given day, the vast overwhelming majority of people make it happily and safely from point A to point B, right? Like it works like 99.9, right? Like cars. So even things that don't work well do work. I'm not sure where I got on that tangent about, but if that makes sense, I think it's just the idea of, consensus and, looking at how people would group or, cognitively kind of chunk something up. And it's amazingly consistent person to person. And so if you don't have the confidence in having looked at a lot of these and had them been right over time, share them with colleagues. You could even get a small working group. The three of you could actually, share decks and review and say, hey, what do you think of it? Right? It doesn't take much. Or you could train somebody in this technique, say, hey, I learned this cool technique, but I kind of want to review, and it, really to be truly ethical and to filter out bias, we want like 3 people doing this. So like, I'll lay out the whole basics and I'll give you a 1, 2, 3. And if you could just go through and fill in the blanks, they don't even need to be an expert researcher per se. They could be a product manager. Product managers look at this stuff all the time, and they have a slightly different perspective. It could be a developer, although that is a little far afield. You could definitely have designers do this, right? This is one of the safest types of research, comparative research, to have designers do without their own confirmation bias, right? They can look at the comparables all day long, if you're working in a situation that you have separate researchers and designers. Does that make sense? Cool. So I don't know if I'll necessarily do a live one for this, but you guys see where you could exactly take off of each of the ones that we've done before, yeah. And then add the lines in. However, there's this cool this on here. It's the curve. I tried the scribble. It wasn't as cool, or I was too wobbly. And then it's fun, right? Because you can really kind of, and even here it's sort of like there's no time I look at this and I feel too different that that like that's what's happening, right? And then that's there. So have some fun with these. And then this gets more into a traditional task model, right? So you could have a task flow here, right? Like, okay, here's the goal, and here are the steps that they take. And here in navigation, you know, you can get, I mean, you could do this with shots of the visual elements, right? So you could say boom, boom, boom. But it's really great to just get it in a simple flow chart like this, right? Because this is the kind of task flow models that that you're reverse engineering that then get put back together within the app. And obviously a task analysis can get infinitely more complex as far as micro interactions, or, you know, what happens when somebody is or isn't logged in, that type of thing. But really the overall main steps, again, is that's the level or focal point we're trying to get at. Like, well, okay, on this page, where do they start? What are the steps they take, and where do they end up? Boom. And so they can be put together like this, or other flow charts with the sort of the diamond shape here. And that's a great way to communicate these. And so then what you've got is reverse wireframes, a feature function, priority list. And then you've got the basic task model of what people are doing there. Like, that's the DNA of the thing, right? Like, okay, here's how they're doing it. And then this goes right into the two questions that relate to this, which are, what is the likely revenue model and what is the conversion model, right? And so those are really just more, it can be as much as a sentence, or just, you know, a simple kind of, okay, revenue model. What's the revenue model on the Jeep site? How does that Jeep site make money? Sales, boom, right? And if they do leasing, it could be a variation of subscription, right? But primarily sales and leasing. They might make some on, you know, all that lifestyle stuff, but that's really, supportive of the marketing of the end conversion, right? And then their conversion model, they're not expecting anybody very much, you know, probably to buy the car right there. What they're probably trying to do is initiate that sales funnel, whether online and consultative, or saying, hey, do you want to get on the phone with somebody? Well, hey, why don't you come down for a test drive? Those are the general, here. So I would actually add something like maybe, consultative, you know.
Would you say that it then kind of, I guess, completes that first step of the funnel, where by the time they go through all the steps of selecting a vehicle, somebody reaches out, by the time they make it to the dealership, they're a lot closer to being able to be a convert? You know, they're already invested in the process and the choices that they made, the model that they want. So it's really almost a confirmation pre-purchase.
Absolutely. And then there's also more data on the side when they get there about what they want. And they may have established some type of a relationship with a salesperson, and they're heading there to talk to somebody with a name, right? Hey, why don't you come down and, XYZ will give you a test drive, right? So a lot of what happened before, where they do things and warm you up, like anybody ever they'll ask you to sign something. I was shopping for a car once, and they had me sign a document that agreed that if everything was okay, that I was willing to buy a car. And I was like, you know, you guys are just getting me used to signing things. I was like, I'm not comfortable with this at all. And so that type of thing, you know, that happens even previously in the analog, you know, flow, right? So much more so where it's multi-stage. Maybe it's the day before, there's a sense of a relationship, there's a lot of credibility because there's credibility with the local dealership. Maybe, you know, somebody bought a car there, but online you can do third-party research, you can look at the Better Business Bureau, you can whatever criterion you want ahead of time. So I think the sales are probably a lot easier in one sense, getting people there, but in the other sense, it's really the value delivers more because it's shifted from advertisers telling, advertising on the few places where we were all stuck, right? We were all on, eight channels and whatever else. Now everybody actually, the consumers drive the medium. And so if a consumer wants to look on AutoNation, or a consumer wants to look online, or they want to do, what's the, some of the TrueCar, right? Comparing dealers, then dealers actually have, then they're at a disadvantage, because that information and that kind of pre-qualification is taken away from them just on the merits of who's delivering the best deal by the numbers, right? So it is an advantage potentially, but it's also a place where they could lose folks. And I think that's why we're seeing a lot of Carvana, come in, and the Carvana did the car vending machines, I think, in LA, which are cool and interesting, kind of a touch point. And then now they're doing touchless, online, sell your car, they'll pick it up and they'll bring a car for you to test drive, which I think is really interesting, right? So it's a disruptive space, and so on the one hand that is happening more, but it's also getting kind of co-opted for entirely different pathways of conversion and fulfillment and loyalty.
So Eric, one thought I had on this, and if we think about, say, the top 3 user journeys that somebody would visit a site. So if we were, I mean, I guess it's the same thing of what you're doing. If we wanted to say user journey 1, like the one I did was doctor service related. So if user journey 1 is find a doctor, user journey 2, schedule an appointment, user journey 3, I don't know, medical advice, just making that up.
Right.
So if is it appropriate to go ahead and label it as such if that's what we think that journey is?
Yes, because I mean, yeah, absolutely, right. So that's like, I think a good way to, where are we?
Because if we did it, designing a site, to your point, there's intent there, right? We need to make money in some capacity.
Yep.
Best bang for our buck. And generally speaking, the best bang for their buck is, if, like, from a doctor's perspective, is if you're a brand new patient to them and you've never been with them before, and you gain them as a patient, they want to gain you as a patient as number 1.
Yep.
So that's the biggest bang for the buck. And then scheduling an appointment later on would be that secondary. I'm just making this up, of course. So if it's appropriate based on what the visualization that you have here, like your primary and your secondary, if we labeled that journey of the intent here is like, well, with yours, it's give me the deal or something. I don't know.
Right. So you could do, primary user goal, right? And here would be, whatever their CTA is, shop now.
Okay.
Boom. Absolute. Come on. Shop now. Anyway.
Okay.
And I think that is absolutely, yes, I think that's an even clearer way of doing it, because then it's like, okay, what they want to do is first they want to shop now for their flagship vehicle. Second thing they want to do is actually find the vehicle, that they identify with, or they want to just find the dealership and actually go look at all the different ones, right? And so giving each of those names instead of something generic like primary user pathway, secondary, I think that's great. And I think that would sell better, right?
Okay.
The trick is, again, in naming them to make sure that it is as much of a direct, descriptor as possible, right? So it's really wayfinding or signage or labeling, if that makes sense, right? So just keep it as simple and descriptive as possible would be the
Okay.
the advice. Yeah.
Fair enough.
But I think that's absolutely great, because then, I mean, that's what stakeholders really grab onto. Well, what do they want to do? They want to shop, they want to find the vehicle they like, or they want to get a dealership. With the physicians, and what you're doing is precisely the analysis that's is a holistic analysis, because you're looking at the business needs and your understanding of the business vertical, and you're looking at your understanding of the patient sides and the outcomes of on the user side, and you're analyzing both of the design and the flow in relation to the likelihoods of those two constituencies. And that's where it comes in, right? Because then you're like, well, no, medically, of course, they'd want to you focus on acquisition because everything stems from that, right? So get the patient in there. You know, but maybe it is somebody who's already a patient and just wants to, you know, chat with a clinician. Okay, well, let's enable that because actually that cuts costs if they do that online. So there's the business goal of why they would want to prioritize that, right? Because sometimes you'll see things and you're like, why do they have that second, right? And then you got to, for a while, you know, there, one thing that puzzled me for a while was if you any optical you know, Walmart eyeglasses, their whole section, I did an analysis for AccuView. They actually have a whole separate website that looks just like the Walmart website, but it's Walmart eyecare.com or whatever it is. And I was baffled by why they would have a whole, right? But it turned out to be a structural liability and HIPAA information and, you know, the tax and liability structure that I had to research on the business side. And then all of a sudden it was like, of course, that makes sense. And actually that gives us space, you know, here, here, and here. But you can't, without having some sense of what the business is trying to do through the website to the consumer, like that's the fulcrum generally, right? Not consumer, to the user. Then, you know, that's where the analysis really does well, if that makes sense. So I think, you know, everybody's intuiting the, you know, how these unpack well in practice, which is good. Very encouraging. It's one of the reasons I like this because it's all you know, very just useful stuff. Anybody have any questions on, and really it could be that, you know, we break this down for one, because I know it, you know, we'd end up with kind of 9 charts at the end, you know, so whatever people have time for, but as long as, you know, maybe on the most interesting website, or if people have the bandwidth to do the full analysis, it'll be interesting even just to get to, you know, just to these levels. These are not necessary, but these can also be put into the jobs to be done methodologies, or you could start chunking these up in, and so that they would fit into, you know, any different formats. If you wanted to reverse engineer into, you know, the CDO methodology, into the jobs to be done, you know, you could even try to you know, put together some very lightweight you know, persona archetypes if you wanted to, but that can get very slippery because they're so subjective and it would be very hard to recreate. But you could say, well, our idea of their primary user archetype is this person who does this, and they seem to talk to them in this tone of voice with this type of credibility, you know, content, right? And so then you can say, so there really is, I mean, I was able to reverse engineer some archetypes on PIPs, the personal investing platforms, because there's really different strategies of how, you know, Fidelity is like friendly, helpful, almost like a pharmacist, right? Like, you know, telling you stuff and giving you helpful tips, and, you know, or a counselor. And whereas Charles Schwab, it was almost like we concluded that it was meant to be the amount of information and the type was meant to be, one, to establish credibility, but also almost overwhelming where you needed an expert to decipher it, right? And it was like, you know, this all seems driven to get a non-specialist to talk to somebody to answer XYZ question and to make Schwab look like they know everything, right? You know, I mean, it was authoritative, right? 2 very different strategies. And then there were even then differentiations or expressions of those within each. There were some sections on Schwab, which were more like Fidelity, and some sections on Fidelity that really got, you know, into talk and shop and super technical. And so they both had, you know, they both acknowledged that those conversion strategies were useful to their constituencies, but they prioritized the share of voice those strategies had in very differently. You know, one was friendly and the other was, you know, authoritative, I mentioned. But yeah. So, you know, these breakdowns can be really useful, and they all, you know, all the insights, if they don't tie into something simple like this, I usually don't, you know, they're usually not insights that fit, right? If they don't fit into, you know, a really resilient underlying structure, I'll tend to sort of, question if those insights are correct. Meaning you make kind of a mental model, run everything through it a few times and see if it works. Doesn't mean I haven't been way wrong on, some things on some times, but really I've never had any of this, the UX pattern research stuff come up and bite me. Like, like other things, it's almost like the more creativity you put into it, the more chance for critique. So, everybody feel like they got a good grasp on that and can dig in for next week. And this is awesome.
Yeah, I think
Thanks
so.
for
That
doing
makes
this, Eric.
sense.
Yeah.
Are all of you, I'm assuming all of you are in the UX industry? Like that is your primary job. That's your primary role, right? All three of you?
Mine is that and data analysis. So,
Okay.
In
Yeah.
particular, I really lean towards any kind of UX audits or inspections, that kind of thing. So I really like the whole evaluative approach. Sometimes I'll compare different competitors' websites on like, hey, they use this widget and things like that. And so I saw this course and I was like, oh, that's another way to look at the competitive stuff.
Yeah. Awesome. I kind of dabble in UX where I can, but it's not my primary expertise or my education or anything, but it's so much fun. I enjoy it so much. So this is fun.
Yeah. And I wouldn't, disavow much about it. I mean, I think, it's if you do UX, you're a UXer. I mean, there's levels of engagement and, expertise, but, you're in here doing the work. So, I would consider you a UXer. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This is fun.
Are you looking for work in the field, or have you done work? Are you just exploring it now and building up the skill set, or?
I would say I've not formally done it. And to be fair, the breadth of UX, I don't know the boundaries, to be fair, but I've done persona mapping and journey mapping, which, that can kind of come here or there. And then I've been working on like a marketing evaluation to bring people in and from the website. And so it's interesting because where I was, the term journey mapping and persona mapping, nobody heard that. They didn't understand it. And I'm like, okay, well, I am by no means an expert. I know enough to be dangerous, but this is the gist of it. Like, so I feel very comfortable talking about it and its intent, but like what we're doing here, I've never fully done that. Like wireframing, I've never done that. I'd say I would probably do more facilitation in concepts and mapping and thought process and thought provoking than I do, I guess, what I would consider to be more technical work.
Sure. Yeah. And so, UX strategy is a specialty. It seems like you're kind of fitting in there. You're doing some of the research work, a lot of like, okay, well, hey, here's how this could come together and impact, and we could make some decisions. And then, okay, let's go ahead and get some designers and developers to knock that out, right? So the strategy facet could be, it's a really rich, interesting one. It overlaps a lot with product managers. And that's actually a pretty, that's a pretty great way to bootstrap into the field as well. Because then how do you say, as a manager, you manage and coordinate, the UX design, the research, development, and also the business and stakeholder interests. And so, if you've got some experience in project management, that could translate into product management in a pretty interesting way that brings some of that strategy, because a lot of times the primary strategist is the product manager in practice. But also I find myself as a researcher with strategy in my lap a lot, because that's where it starts. Like, well, hey, what does this mean? Or people will be like, oh, it means this. And I'll be like, well, it might mean that. Right. So, that's where the strategy begins from the research side as well. But it's also interesting because, designers really need to be involved in that where the strategy, especially goes into the UI. And if they're a UX designer in the overall, information architecture and interaction design and all the way up to visual design.
Yeah.
But it's, it's good stuff. There's nobody ever, I've always thought the full stack idea of like somebody who knows, like, I know all the programming languages, or so I've seen like, full stack UX professional, like nobody knows all the things, right? Like, so, find an area, where you feel like it's your wheelhouse, you got some enthusiasm and some traction, get some wins there, and then start building on those, because then you can say, look, here's how I applied this to improve this outcome, and this is what I do. And then, you do that a few times, and then the more situations comes up, you'll be like, hey, I got processes, we can handle this, and then you'll start feeling more, seasoned, right? And then you'll be like, oh God, UX. I'm kidding. I still love it, as you can tell. They gave us a full hour. I feel wonderful about that. So ping me with any questions, and I think we'll have some folks come through asynchronously with this as well, and hopefully we'll get some more assignments to share. But I want to thank everybody again for the time and the feedback on this. There is a question as well within the homework, which is, what are some potential biases or shortcomings in the UX pattern research approach? And then the assignment, as we said, which is, just going through and replicating that process on the example deck, which is linked into that document. So everybody have a wonderful Wednesday. We'll see you next week. I'll get that scheduled and up, and I will get this turned into a proper assignment before end of day today.
Awesome. Thanks,
All right.
Eric.
Thanks.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.